It's day 413 of the Gaza genocide. The official death toll is nearing on 45,000 dead Palestinians. There are many developments on the international scene. To discuss with me these developments, I'm delighted to have join us today Professor Sami Al Arian, the director of the Center for Islam and Global Affairs at Istanbul Sabahattin Zaim University. Thank you, Professor, for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
I'd like to start with the most significant development of the week, which is the ICC ruling. I'm sure you've seen the headlines, you've seen the reactions from the international media, the so-called international community. What are your opinions on this ICC ruling? Has it come at the right time? Is it going to do anything?
It's a very significant ruling for sure. For the first time in the history of the ICC, a regime that is not part of the global south, not part of the African countries, because all other rulings, with the exception, of course, of Putin, were coming from the global south or from African countries. So for this to come is very significant, particularly in light of what happened in the past year of a genocide that has been not only going on day in and day out for over almost now 14 months, but also it's been shown on TV every single day. It's not something that happened in the past. It's not something that took place behind where the cameras were not there. It is something that everybody is witnessing, and it has been taking a long time for them to issue this ruling. So it's not the right time. I think it's much delayed. But nevertheless, it has come. It has affirmed what everybody knew, what's going on in Gaza today. It's not only genocide and ethnic cleansing and war of extermination and genocide, but also it is something that the world must take a stand on, and that's what's been missing. But we'll wait and see whether it will actually be just a symbolic gesture to the victims of this Israeli genocide, or whether it's going to actually be acted upon. It is significant from the standpoint that all members, which are about, I think, 124 countries, have said that they will carry it out, particularly in Europe. Most of the countries in Europe, if not all, are members of the ICC. They have ratified this agreement, which means it becomes incumbent upon them to carry out its orders, which is to arrest the war criminal Netanyahu and his comrade, war criminal Gallant. The absence of any consideration by those countries who have not ratified, such as the United States, of trying to whitewash the genocide, of trying to justify what happened, is another indictment on the US. It's been trying to say that it is for the rule of law, that it stands for international standards, but when it comes to Israel, it just has a blind side that it does not actually stand for anything. When this ruling was issued for other world leaders such as Putin or some African presidents, it immediately came to hail that ruling, to ask for countries to carry it out, and trying to show that it is for this kind of international law. But when it came to the Zionist regime, it rejected the ruling. It said that it does not have jurisdiction, which is absolutely nonsense, and they know it. So it is another form of how the United States has been exposed, how the United States has shown not only it has double standards, but it's hypocritical. Because in addition to covering for Israel, the United States is also complicit in the crime of genocide. And that ruling should actually have also covered Biden and Blinken and company.
Notwithstanding the American support for the genocide, the Zionist entity has many allies that are bound by the Rome Statute, and should the one of the criminals, Netanyahu or Gallant, step foot in those countries, they are supposedly meant to be arresting those criminals. Now, a country like the United Kingdom, for example, is a very important ally to Israel. In fact, when the new Labour government took charge, David Lammy, the foreign minister, made one of his first visits to Netanyahu, and there's a photo of him shaking hands with this criminal. What does it mean for the relationship of the Zionist entity Israel with its allies in Europe that one of these two criminals may get arrested should they step foot in on the soil of one of their strongest allies?
It's very doubtful that Netanyahu is going to set foot in any of the countries that has signed these statutes, particularly those in Europe. I think it will be the height of hypocrisy for them to allow such entry. Actually, it's against their own law. So I doubt very much that Netanyahu would ever set foot again in Europe. Whether the United Kingdom will carry it out or not remains to be seen, but I doubt very much, particularly with the current government, that they're going to just ignore that these arrest warrants and allow Netanyahu to set foot in Britain. So my conclusion is that they will just tell him not to ever come there. And I think there will be an effort, even from the United States, maybe before Trump takes office, is to make sure that Netanyahu would either stop the war and trying to have maybe a bargain with some powers in order to basically bargain that they can drop these charges. But I doubt very much that the ICC would agree to this. And therefore, it's a problem. It's a problem for the West. It's a problem for the US. It's a problem for Europe, for this international system that the US and other allies have set up. So how are they going to deal with it? I think in the end result, they will try perhaps to pressure the Israeli body politic to drop Netanyahu in order to save Israel. Otherwise, Israel would remain as a pariah, and therefore it's going to be a problem. But I think another important aspect of this is that it becomes now extremely difficult for any attempt at normalization, particularly with the Arab countries. I cannot foresee that there will be any kind of a process that will integrate Israel into the regional order with Netanyahu at the helm of the government. And that's, I think, a good thing.
Recently, the former Israeli Justice Minister Ayelet Shaked was denied entry to Australia over potential incitement that she may create within that country. Do you think this is the start of something big?
I think it's also very significant because I think she also has affirmed and agreed upon all the genocidal acts and defended the genocidal acts that the Israeli army and the Israeli regime have been committing in Gaza and Lebanon and other places during this past year. So I think this is very significant as well. And I believe it's the beginning of the world opening its eyes to the nature of the Zionist regime. The Zionist regime is a racist, supremacist, aggressive, settler colonial regime that is trying very hard right now to change the realities on the ground by dealing with the demographic problem of the Palestinians, because the nature of that state, the nature of that regime, in trying to have one group, basically Jewish, dominating the other group, basically Arab Palestinian, in order to establish an ethnic state, an ethnic supremacist state, which is the Zionist state. So for that to take place, they are taking advantage of what happened October the 7th, and it's trying to depopulate Gaza, try to expel and kill and ethnically cleanse as many Palestinians as possible, take over as much of the land as possible, not only in Gaza, in the north of Gaza, but also across the West Bank, particularly Area C. This is for them, particularly these extremists within the government and in the West Bank, take advantage of what's taking place in order to establish what they consider as greater Israel. And I think the whole world now is waking up to this fact that this illusion called two-state is gone, and that if it is left to the devices of the current Zionist regime, what will happen is a disaster to the international system, is a disaster to every norm that the international order is trying to set, regardless of what happened in the past to the Palestinians. This is something that I think many leaders and countries are unable to stomach. And we're seeing these before our own eyes with what the Australian government did to this Israeli minister, but also to what other governments, some of them, of course, have long said that they are allies of the Zionist regime, but they are finding it very difficult to defend these acts, particularly of what's happening in Gaza with the genocide.
I'd like to move on to the US. You have previously lived in the US. You have some family members in the US at the moment. And you recently wrote a piece for AlJazeera.net prior to the elections, highlighting the potential dangers of a Trump presidency, yet nevertheless advising Arab Americans and those of conscience to either vote for Jill Stein or to write Gaza on their ballot to express their disapproval of America's complicity in the Gaza genocide. It's currently almost 3 weeks since Trump was elected as the new president. Where do you think things stand today?
I think pretty much of what some people who were completely disappointed with this Democratic administration, with Biden and with Harris and their partners in government, Blinken, Sullivan, Austin, and everyone else, is that they have not only supported but enabled, funded, and protected the genocide, and that it wasn't at all possible for the Arab and Muslim communities in the United States to vote for first Biden and then to Harris, who refused every opportunity to take a stand, a principled stand on Gaza, on the genocide. She will always precede her statement that Israel has the right to defend itself, which means Israel would have the right to commit genocide on the Palestinians. And of course, no sane person who is against the genocide, who is taking a moral, ethical, and principled stand would support such a candidate or such a policy. And therefore, they were warned time after time that the end result of this is that the majority of the people who are against the genocide, Muslims, Arabs, or otherwise, will find it very difficult to support Harris. This may not mean much for the Arabs and Muslim community, who were probably overall number than less than 1%, even though in the state of Michigan, which is a battleground state, a swing state, it become even more important because it was at the time all shown neck and neck. And therefore, I think about 2 weeks before, I think it was October 21st, almost 2 weeks before the elections, a New York article came talking about the uncommitted voters or the undecided voters. These are the people who decided to vote, not the people who will boycott, and I will discuss that in a second, but the people who decided, or who were not decided at the time, but they were going to vote. The article said that they were 6-1 going to decide on Gaza. And the number for these battleground states were about 3.7% of the total vote who would, or the people who would actually vote. That's a lot of undecideds when it comes to the issue of voting in a battleground state where it was neck and neck. And when I looked at the numbers, actually before and after the voting, before meaning in the 2020 elections and after in the 2024 elections, I found in the 6 battleground states that Biden won in 2020, but Trump won in 2024, namely Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada. These 6 battleground states. Biden won by 256,000 votes combined. And when you look 4 years later, in 2024, you will find that Trump won them by exactly the same number, 255,000 votes, 1,000 votes less. And in both cases, they represented 1.6% of the total vote. That tells me that this article was right on the money, that about 85% of the undecided voters actually went and voted for Trump, because you had a shift of almost 3.2% going from Biden all the way switched to Trump, where the number, I mean, actually we had 10 million votes less for Harris than we did with Biden, which tells us, again, very important statistic, is that 10 million people didn't show up. They didn't vote, and the answer is why. And you have also to add about 4 or 5 million voters who were added to the rolls in 4 years. So about 14 to 15 million people didn't actually vote, did not go and cast a vote. And there has to be a reason. That reason, some people would attribute to economics, inflation, other social issues, and so on and so forth. But I found that to be very difficult to believe, because usually if you disagree on a policy, it has to be a policy that will be differences. It will take you from one candidate to the other. But to boycott, that means you're disgusted by both candidates because you can't find home in any one of them. And the only issue that I could find that both candidates agree on was on supporting the genocide. And therefore, you don't want to vote for Harris because of the genocide. You don't want to go to Trump because he is no different on this issue. And therefore, what do? Either you go for third party, and I think most people didn't do that, or you simply stay home and boycott. And in terms of my own family members who actually are voters in the US elections, 5 out of the 6 actually chose to stay home. No one of them, which was for the first time in as many years that I can remember, decided not to cast a vote, or the 6 actually decided to vote for Jill Stein. So the end result, I think, from the data that is before us, is that the majority of the people who were disappointed decided not to cast a vote. That's why Trump won the popular vote. But when it comes to the battleground states that will actually decide the elections, you'll find that there was a shift for those undecided voters. The majority of them went to Trump for the simple reason is that they wanted to punish the Democrats because of their stand on the genocide, on the Israeli genocide in Gaza.
That's a brilliant insight, Professor. Thank you for that. You also mentioned in your piece that Trump may accelerate the dismantling or disbanding of the American empire as a potential positive outcome. Given that the other players who look to pick up the pieces of the American empire, given that they are no more benevolent than the US itself, is this really something to look forward to?
I think if there is any silver lining in the elections of Trump, is that he is determined now with this newfound momentum of him winning not only the electoral college vote, but also the popular vote. He feels like he has a mandate from the American people, and indeed that's the only conclusion. This is the first time a Republican actually wins the popular vote since 2004. That's in 20 years. I think he is determined to take his revenge, his retribution, his battle with the so-called deep state, the bureaucratic state that has been sustaining and supporting the expansion of the American empire, the sustenance of the American empire, the survival of the American empire, however you want to describe it and characterize it. And I think for that to happen, he has shown his hands by appointing these appointments in very significant positions who are also determined, like him, to take on this deep state and try to roll back the American empire. So if that is actually carried out, because he will have very powerful enemies within the American administration, in the bureaucracy, in the Pentagon, in the foreign policy establishment, in many other aspects. So we'll have to wait and see how he's going to carry this out. We have over 800 military bases, American military bases around around the globe. The United States has over 850 or so $billion just in the defense budget, and you may also have to add hundreds of billions in the intelligence agencies and others. So we're talking almost over $1 trillion in the foreign policy establishment, and he has vowed to cut down, at least theoretically speaking, at least another $1 trillion from the budget, and then he wants to extend the tax cuts. That's a huge endeavor. How are you going to cut down taxes, meaning that you're going to trim what comes to the government? You also would like to roll back and the empire. That means you have to watch, number one, how many military bases will actually be shut down, how much commitment would be cut from those he is giving to NATO and other alliances. And if that is carried out, then certainly the American empire will start waning, which is not a bad thing for the world. I think this will probably be very healthy. That is going to be a momentous battle. And I think we have to wait and see how this is going to be carried out, in light also of his many commitments to the Zionist regime and its wars. He asked and urged Netanyahu, the war criminal Netanyahu, to finish the war, meaning that he can continue with his ethnic cleansing, with his destruction of Gaza and Lebanon and the West Bank. And he has also vowed to allow Netanyahu to annex land in the West Bank and also to integrate Israel into the regional order. These are a lot of commitments which would involve American defense of Israel, because so far Israel has failed to defeat any of its enemies, has failed to achieve any of its military and political objectives, and to give them extra room, more room to do that, and more backing to do that, that's going to derail whatever agenda he has on the international scene. But I think probably another quick sign would be what happens in Europe with regards to Ukraine and his tariff policy with China. That's going to raise the tensions. So we're going to see very interesting presidency, particularly in the first 2 years, in which he will have basically free hand to carry out whatever program he has, since he has the Republicans as a majority in both houses of Congress, in the House and the Senate.
With regards to Trump's relationship with Israel, it's said on the one hand that he doesn't have a good relationship with Prime Minister Netanyahu and that he would not support the annexation of the West Bank. But on the other hand, he appoints staunch Zionists like Mike Huckabee, who is an evangelical Christian, who already considers the West Bank, Judea and Samaria as the ambassador to Israel. How, in your opinion, will a Trump presidency affect the Gaza genocide and the Palestinian question in general?
I'm not sure that he doesn't support annexation, because whatever he says on the campaign trail should not be trusted, even though he has promised certain people, certain donors, mega donors of his campaign, that he would allow that to happen, particularly Miriam Edelson. Several reports have shown that. But I think the best indication what a Trump policy to the Palestinian issue would be is looking back at his so-called deal of the century, which was basically done by his son-in-law, which incorporated most of Israel's demands into that document. That document does not show that he is restraining Israel from annexing important part of the West Bank, particularly in the Jordan Valley, in those so-called settlement communities. And I think what was left there was to be still negotiated, which I think he also said on the campaign trail very clearly that he thinks Israel needs more land and that they're a vast land. And I think there will be a lot of pressure on the Arab governments, the Arab states, to take as many Palestinians and give them land, and he will try to bribe them with money and others. So I'm not so sure that he is not committed to a greater Israel, but that remains to be seen. The only factor, the only element that would defeat this plan is Palestinian resilience and resistance, and we have seen this very vividly throughout the past year, where whatever designs, whatever plans, schemes, plots Israel has for the Palestinians have all been defeated because of this resilience and resistance. In trying to expel as many Palestinians from Gaza and trying to place them in Egypt or even in some parts of Gaza, that plan has failed. In trying to annex parts of the West Bank and trying to restrain the Palestinians and threatening to throw them to the West Bank, that has not been carried out because, again, of Palestinian resistance. And I think even they're trying to push back Hezbollah in the south of Lebanon and trying to impose certain facts. So far, that plan has also failed. So on all fronts, Israel has been unable to fulfill its objectives, to achieve its objectives, to use its military might with the support of the United States to impose certain facts on the ground. And the end result is with this complete failure is that the setback, the strategic setback of Israel. So regardless of what Trump wants or doesn't want, it's not going to happen. He will try his best to integrate Israel and to try to put the pressure not on Israelis to withdraw or to have some sort of a settlement, political settlement for the Palestinians. His attempt would be, or his plan would be, to impose on the Arab regimes, who are the weakest link in this struggle, in order to accommodate as much of the Israeli desires as possible, regardless of what the Palestinians want.
You mentioned Israel's failure to damage Hezbollah on the ground. There have been some reports that there is an American attempt to stoke the fires of civil tension, civil war potentially in Lebanon in order to get at Hezbollah through the Lebanese army. Why would the Americans go so far to create instability in the region, as opposed to just agreeing to some sort of settlement in Gaza and ending the war?
It has been a long-standing objective of the United States to end Hezbollah's dominance in Lebanese politics. This is nothing new. And I think they are sensing, since the pages by the Israelis to damage as much of Hezbollah's operatives as possible, to encourage the Lebanese factions to put more pressure on Hezbollah in trying to achieve this strategic goal, which is to damage the power, or at least lessen the power, or end the dominance of Hezbollah in Lebanese politics. And I believe that they will fail. I think there are many factions within Lebanon, particularly with some of the Christian Maronite factions, as well as some of the Sunni factions, that the United States thinks that it can use in this struggle in order to roll back the power of Hezbollah. And I think they found it as a historical opportunity, since they have been very frustrated with the rise of Hezbollah since the early 2000s, when Israel withdrew, and particularly after 2006, when Israel was unable to militarily defeat Hezbollah, and then with the ability of Hezbollah to strategically have these weapons and being basically the dominant force, which basically is also the real reason for having stability in Lebanon. But now they found that it is in their advantage to weaken Hezbollah by encouraging these factions to put more pressure on Hezbollah and even possibly stoke civil war. But we haven't seen any real evidence that this is successful. Yes, there are Sami Al Arian and other groups in Lebanon who are trying to put or use this opportunity to show that they are militarily capable of standing up to Hezbollah. But I think this is just a pipe dream. I don't think this is ever going to happen. I don't think Hezbollah has been defeated. I don't think the power of Hezbollah has been weakened to the point where these factions can take over. I think there was a setback, but I think pretty quickly Hezbollah has shown that it is capable of standing up not only to the Israeli designs on South Lebanon. They haven't been able to carry a ground invasion, real ground invasion, and they haven't been able to mute Hezbollah. They haven't been able to push Hezbollah from the south. They haven't been able to have a real defeat on Hezbollah. Hezbollah has been sending missiles and ballistic rockets and so on and so forth to the heart of the Zionist regime. Every time they hit Beirut, they hit back in Haifa and Tel Aviv and other places. And every day there are casualties, real casualties. And I don't think they can sustain these casualties. So if Israel cannot defeat Hezbollah, how could these very weak factions who really have no real military might in Lebanon, how they will be able to stand up to Hezbollah? So I think it's just a wish list on the part of the United States. They were trying to encourage them at least to show some kind of a resolve that they can stand up to Hezbollah. But I think so far, the majority of the Lebanese people and the majority of the Lebanese parties have been steadfast against the Israeli and American designs.
One final question before I let you go, Professor. With regards to Gaza, one of the most prominent news items these last couple of weeks is that there are gangs looting critical aid coming off trucks. And at the beginning of the genocide, Israel and its stenographers in the West compared Hamas to ISIS. But recently it's been reported that Israel is aiding ISIS-linked gangs in looting this crucial aid. What does this say about Israeli strategy in Gaza right now?
I mean, it's well known what Israeli plan is for Gaza. It is to have a chaos, anarchy. It has been, I don't know whether they're linked to ISIS or not. I have not seen any evidence of that. But certainly there are gangs, there are criminals, thieves, people who are part of people who were actually in prison before October 7th, and they were freed because of the chaos taking place. There are criminal gangs in Gaza, and they have been aided by Israel. And how do we know this? Because much of that gang thievery taking place and violence against ordinary citizens is done next to Israeli barracks, to Israeli presence, where you can't claim that the resistance is there. They let them go and raid these truck aids, take them over, and try to sell them and kill those people, particularly drivers, dozens and dozens of drivers. After they would let go from a checkpoint by Israel, within a few kilometers, they would be raided and they would be killed, and the whole aid would be taken over, and the Palestinians would be deprived of this aid, which is minuscule to start with, but they will be taken over by these gangs and then sold to merchants, to the people who actually are making a ton of money because of this. And this is all under the Israeli eyes and with the encouragement of Israeli eyes. There are many evidence that has been shown, not by Palestinians, even though the evidence is there, but even with international organizations in which they say that and they identified actually the heads of these gangs. And recently, the resistance has been able to track down the heads of these gangs and eliminate them because of the chaos and the violence that they have been using against the Palestinians with the encouragement of the Israeli criminal army.
Professor Sami, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today, and I hope we can have another conversation like this soon.
Thank you.